Hello everyone. My name is Sage Montgomery, and looking back, I was about 33 when the most uniquely satisfying moment of my life unfolded. It happened at my own brother's wedding, a place where you'd expect family pride and joy to be the main course, not a cold dish of comeuppance. But life, as they say, has a funny way of painting its own pictures. For years, my family, particularly my parents, had a special term for my passion, my career, my very soul: a waste of time. My paintings, my gallery, everything I poured my heart into was just a quaint little hobby in their eyes, especially when compared to my brother Ethan's very sensible and successful career path. So, imagine the scene: a lavish wedding, hundreds of guests, and all around them, adorning the walls of this incredibly chic venue, was artwork. Stunning, modern, captivating pieces. And who do you think was responsible for every single piece being there, for discovering the artists, for curating that collection? Yeah, me. But they didn't know that. Not until the little plaques next to each piece, or the note in the exquisitely printed program, revealed the curator's name. Have you ever felt so completely underestimated by the people who are supposed to be your biggest champions? It's a particular kind of sting, isn't it? Let me know in the comments where you're watching from today. And if you've ever had to fight tooth and nail for your dreams while those closest to you just didn't get it, or worse, actively dismissed it, hit that like button. Maybe subscribe, because you're definitely in the right company here. This is for everyone who's ever had to prove their worth, not to the world, but to the people who should have seen it all along. My childhood was, in many ways, defined by Ethan. He was the golden boy, 2 years older, effortlessly charming, and academically gifted in all the ways our parents understood and valued. He played sports, he got straight A's in math and science, he was on the debate team. I, on the other hand, was the quiet one, often lost in my own world, a sketchbook my most constant companion. From the moment I could hold a crayon, I drew. I drew on everything: napkins, the margins of my notebooks, the condensation on windows. It wasn't a choice, it was like breathing. My parents, bless their hearts, probably saw it as a harmless, if slightly odd, pastime for a little girl. "Oh, Sage is just doodling again," became a common refrain, usually said with an affectionate but ultimately dismissive smile. I remember one Christmas, I must have been about 8, Ethan got a state-of-the-art telescope, a symbol of his bright scientific future. I received a beautiful, expensive set of oil paints and canvases from my grandmother, my mother's mother, who was the only one who seemed to see the fire in me. My parents' reaction was polite, but I saw the flicker of something else in their eyes. "That's lovely, dear." My mother said, her gaze already drifting back to Ethan, who was explaining the constellations he was going to find. My father patted my head. "Just try not to make too much of a mess, Sagey." The expensive paints felt heavy in my hands, not like a gift, but like a burden, a secret indulgence they were tolerating. As we grew older, the lines were drawn more clearly. Ethan was destined for a career in finance or law. It was spoken of as an inevitability, a preordained path to success. My artistic endeavors, however, were increasingly met with polite suggestions for more practical hobbies. "Sage, that drawing is very colorful," my father would say, peering at a landscape I'd spent weeks on. "But have you thought about joining the math club? Your brother enjoys it so much." The comparison was always there, subtle or overt. Ethan was the standard, I was the deviation. My room was my sanctuary, walls covered in sketches, canvases leaning against every surface, the air thick with the smell of turpentine and linseed oil. It was a world they rarely entered. When they did, it was usually with a sigh about the clutter or a gentle reminder to open a window. They never asked about the techniques, the inspiration, the stories behind the images. It was just Sage's stuff, harmless, but ultimately inconsequential in the grand scheme of their ambitions for their children. This quiet, persistent dismissal was like a slow-growing vine, wrapping around my burgeoning confidence, trying to choke it before it could ever truly bloom. It wasn't malicious, not in the way outright cruelty is. It was worse, in a way. It was indifference. An indifference that whispered, "You don't really matter. This thing you love, it's not important." And that, right there, was the seed of everything that was to come. The real turning point, the event that shifted the subtle undercurrent of dismissal into a full-blown tidal wave of disapproval, came when I was 17. It was time for college applications, a period of immense pressure and expectation in our household, especially following Ethan's smooth entry into a prestigious business program 2 years prior. My parents had a vision for me, something respectable, stable. Perhaps a teacher, or maybe something in marketing if I insisted on being creative. They had brochures laid out on the dining table for weeks, local universities with solid, if uninspiring, programs. I, however, had other plans. My heart was set on the Rhode Island School of Design, or maybe the Art Institute of Chicago. These names were like incantations to me, whispered promises of a place where I would belong, where my doodles would be understood as a language. I'd spent months secretly working on my portfolio, pouring every ounce of my skill and passion into each piece. It was, I felt, the best work I had ever done. The thought of presenting this to my parents filled me with a nauseating mix of hope and dread. The evening I chose to tell them, Ethan was home for the weekend. Dinner was its usual affair. My father recounting a success at his firm, my mother praising Ethan's latest academic achievement, Ethan himself modestly accepting the accolades. I picked at my food, my stomach churning. Finally, as my mother was clearing the plates, I took a deep breath. "Mom, Dad," I began, my voice smaller than I intended. "I've been working on my college applications, and I want to apply to art school." Silence. A heavy, immediate silence descended on the room. My mother stopped mid-stride, a stack of plates in her hand. My father, who had been chuckling at something Ethan said, slowly turned his head towards me, his smile fading. Ethan looked from me to them, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Surprise? Pity? "Art school?" my father finally said, his voice carefully neutral, a tone I knew often preceded a lecture. "Sage, we've talked about this. Art is a wonderful hobby, but it's not a career. It's not practical." "But it's what I love, Dad," I pleaded, my voice gaining a desperate edge. "It's what I'm good at. I've put together a portfolio. The deadlines are soon." My mother set the plates down with a clatter that sounded unnaturally loud in the tense room. "Sage, darling," she said, her voice laced with a weary disappointment that cut deeper than anger. "RISD, Chicago? Those places are incredibly expensive. And for what? To learn how to paint pretty pictures. What kind of job will you get with that? How will you support yourself?" "Many artists support themselves," I argued, though even to my own ears, I sounded naive. "I can teach, I can do freelance work, I can work in galleries, maybe even own one someday." "Galleries?" my father scoffed, a short, sharp sound of derision. "Sage, be realistic. Your brother is going to be an investment banker. He'll have a stable future, a good income. That's what we want for you too. Security, not this flight of fancy." The term flight of fancy felt like a slap, my dreams, my ambitions, reduced to a whimsical, childish notion. Tears pricked at my eyes, but I fought them back. "It's not a flight of fancy to me," I said, my voice trembling. "It's my life. It's who I am." Ethan, who had been silent up until this point, finally spoke. "Sage, maybe you could minor in art? Major in something more employable?" It was meant to be helpful, a compromise, but it felt like another nail in the coffin of their understanding. "But I don't want to minor in art," I exclaimed, the frustration bubbling over. "I want to immerse myself in it. Don't you understand? This isn't just something I do, it's who I want to be." My mother sighed, a deeply theatrical sound. "We just want what's best for you, Sage, and honestly, this constant focus on your art, it's a waste of time. A lovely pastime, but it won't pay the bills. It won't give you the life we've worked so hard to provide for you and Ethan." "So you won't help me?" I asked, the words hanging heavy in the air. "If I get into one of these schools, you won't support it?" My father looked at my mother, a silent communication passing between them. Then he turned back to me, his face set in a look of grim resolution. "Sage," he said, his voice firm. "If you insist on pursuing this hobby as a primary focus, then you'll have to find your own way to pay for it. We will contribute to a sensible degree at a state university for a practical major, but we will not bankrupt ourselves for what we see as a dead end." The finality in his tone was crushing. It wasn't just a disagreement, it was a fundamental rejection of my deepest aspirations. I remember looking at their faces, my father's stern, my mother's etched with worry and disapproval, Ethan's carefully neutral. In that moment, I felt utterly alone. The vibrant colors of my portfolio hidden away in my room seemed to dim. The dreams I'd nurtured so carefully felt fragile, exposed, and deeply, deeply unwanted. The hurt was a physical ache in my chest, a cold knot of despair. They saw my passion not as a strength but as a weakness, a foolish indulgence. And that, more than the financial threat, was what broke a small piece of my heart that evening. It was the moment I realized that if I wanted this, I would have to fight for it, entirely on my own. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the echo of my father's words. A dead end. Find your own way, replaying in my mind. The initial shock and despair began to crystallize into something else, something harder, a cold, quiet resolve. If they wouldn't support me, if they truly believed my passion was a waste of time, then I would prove them wrong. Not for them, not anymore, but for myself. I made a silent vow that night. I would go to art school, I would make a life for myself through my art, and I would do it without their help, without their approval. It was a terrifying prospect, the path ahead suddenly shrouded in uncertainty and financial worry, but it was also strangely liberating. Their rejection had, in a way, cut the strings of expectation that had bound me. The acceptance letter from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago arrived on a rainy April afternoon. I remember holding the thick envelope, my hands trembling. Ripping it open, I scanned the first line, and a wave of pure, unadulterated joy washed over me, so potent it momentarily eclipsed the looming difficulties. I had done it. I was in. But the joy was quickly tempered by the daunting reality. Chicago was expensive, and my parents had made their position clear. The next few years were a relentless grind. I moved into a tiny, run-down apartment miles from campus with 2 other art students, Lily and Max, who quickly became my lifeline. To pay tuition and living expenses, I worked 3 part-time jobs. From 6 a.m. to 8 a.m., I cleaned lecture halls at the university. During the day, I attended classes, snatching moments in the studio whenever I could, often fueled by lukewarm coffee and sheer willpower. In the evenings, I waitressed at a greasy diner near our apartment, the smell of stale fries clinging to my clothes. On weekends, I worked at a local bookstore, surrounded by stories and knowledge, a small comfort in the whirlwind of my life. Sleep became a luxury. My diet consisted mainly of instant noodles, cheap pasta, and whatever free food I could scrounge from gallery openings or student events. There were nights I'd come home, hands aching from sketching or serving plates, my body screaming for rest, only to remember a looming deadline for a painting or a critical theory paper. I'd set up my easel in our cramped living room, often painting late into the night while Lily sketched beside me or Max sculpted, the 3 of us bound by our shared dream and shared poverty. The emotional toll was immense. There were moments of profound loneliness, of crushing self-doubt. I'd see other students whose parents paid their tuition, who had the luxury of focusing solely on their art, and a bitter envy would sometimes creep in. I missed the easy comfort of my childhood home, even if it had been a place of misunderstanding. Phone calls with my parents were strained. My mother would ask, "Are you eating properly, dear?" And "When are you going to get a real job?" My father would offer unsolicited advice about transferring to a more practical course. They never asked to see my work. They never acknowledged the sacrifices I was making. It was as if my life in Chicago was happening in a vacuum, completely disconnected from their reality. Yet, amidst the hardship, there were sparks of light. Lily, with her fiery red hair and equally fiery passion for photography, became my confidant, my sister in arms. She had a knack for making me laugh even when I wanted to cry, for reminding me why we were putting ourselves through this. "Think of it, Sage," she'd say, gesturing dramatically with a breadstick at the diner. "One day, they'll be begging for tickets to your show, and we'll be like, 'Sorry, sold out.'" Max, quiet and intense, was a brilliant sculptor who saw the world in forms and textures I was only beginning to understand. He'd offer critiques that were blunt but always insightful, pushing me to see beyond the surface of my work. And then there was Professor Alistair Finch. He was a renowned painter himself, semi-retired but teaching a few advanced classes. He was old school, demanding, and utterly brilliant. He saw something in my work, a raw talent, a unique voice struggling to emerge. He became my mentor, pushing me harder than anyone, dissecting my paintings with a critical eye, but always, always, with an undercurrent of belief. "Montgomery?" He'd rumble, peering at a canvas I'd poured my soul into. "You have the vision, now find the discipline." Art isn't just about feeling, it's about relentless, unforgiving work. His validation was like water in a desert. He saw me, the artist, not just Sage, the hobbyist. Meanwhile, life for Ethan, as I gathered from my parents' glowing reports, was proceeding smoothly along its pre-approved track. He graduated with honors, landed a prestigious internship, and was quickly climbing the corporate ladder in finance. My parents bought him a new car as a graduation present. They helped him with the down payment on a condo. His successes were celebrated with fanfare, detailed in long, enthusiastic emails and phone calls. "Ethan just closed a huge deal." My mother would chirp. "His boss says he's a natural. We're so proud." The contrast was stark, a constant, painful reminder of the different worlds we inhabited in their eyes. Ethan's path was paved with gold and parental approval. Mine was a rocky, uphill climb, undertaken in the shadows of their disappointment. But with every small victory, a good grade, a compliment from Professor Finch, a piece sold at a student exhibition for a meager sum that felt like a fortune, my resolve hardened. I was forging my own path, brick by painful brick. Despite the constant struggle, or perhaps because of it, my art began to mature. The hardships, the loneliness, the quiet defiance, it all found its way onto my canvases. Professor Finch pushed me relentlessly, his critiques often brutal but always aimed at honing my skill and vision. "Don't just paint what you see, Montgomery." He'd lecture, his voice raspy. "Paint what you feel. Paint the damn truth, even if it's ugly." I took his words to heart. My work became bolder, more evocative. I started experimenting with textures, with light and shadow in ways I hadn't dared before. I graduated with distinction, a fact my parents acknowledged with a polite, "Oh, that's nice, dear," during one of our brief phone calls. There was no party, no proud pronouncements to relatives. It was just another milestone they didn't quite know how to process. For a while, I juggled teaching art classes to children, a surprisingly joyful experience, with commission work that barely paid the bills. I shared a slightly larger, slightly less dilapidated apartment with Lily, who was now freelancing as a photographer. Max had moved to New York, already making waves in the sculpture scene. My first significant break came when a small, independent gallery in a trendy neighborhood offered me a solo exhibition. It was a tiny space, but it was mine for a month. I poured every cent I had, and some I borrowed from Lily, into preparing for it. The opening night was a blur of nerves and cheap wine. A handful of friends came. Professor Finch made an appearance, his presence, a quiet validation that meant the world to me. And then, a minor miracle, a local art critic, known for her discerning eye and occasionally scathing reviews, wrote a small but incredibly positive piece about my show. She called my work fiercely honest and imbued with a quiet power. That review opened a few more doors. More commissions came in, some for actual money. I started selling pieces more regularly. The dream of owning my own gallery, once a distant, almost laughable fantasy, began to feel attainable. It took another 5 years of relentless work, of saving every spare penny, of navigating the complex world of art sales and gallery management, often learning through costly mistakes. Lily was my rock throughout this period, offering business advice gleaned from her own freelance struggles and unwavering moral support. Finally, at the age of 30, I opened Montgomery Gallery. It wasn't in the most prestigious part of town, not initially. It was a modest space, but it was mine. I filled it with work from emerging artists I believed in, artists whose voices, like mine, deserved to be heard. I also, discreetly, hung a few of my own pieces, listed under my full name, Sage Evangeline Montgomery, a small act of claiming my identity. My parents' reaction to the gallery was predictable. My mother visited once on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. She walked around, her expression unreadable. "It's a very artistic space, Sage," she commented, her gaze lingering on a particularly abstract sculpture. "Are you sure you can make a living from this, dear? It all seems very niche." My father never came. He'd ask about it on the phone. "How's the little shop doing, Sagey?" The term little shop grated, but I'd learned to let it slide. Their dismissal was a dull ache now, familiar and almost comforting in its consistency. They were still far more interested in Ethan's latest promotion, his new luxury apartment, his upcoming engagement to Chloe, a lovely girl from a wealthy family. Chloe, she was an interesting development. I'd met her a few times at family gatherings. She was polite, intelligent, and seemed genuinely kind. Unlike my parents, she'd ask me about my gallery with what seemed like genuine curiosity. "That must be so exciting, Sage," she'd said during one Christmas dinner while my parents were engrossed in a story Ethan was telling. To be surrounded by art all day, to discover new talent. I'd given her a cautious, non-committal answer, wary of anyone associated too closely with my family's sphere of judgment. But a tiny seed of something, not quite hope, but perhaps curiosity, was planted. She seemed to see me, if only for a moment, as something other than Ethan's eccentric, artsy sister. The wedding invitation arrived a few months later. It was thick cream cardstock embossed with gold lettering announcing the union of Ethan Montgomery and Chloe Davenport at the Willow Creek Estates, one of the most exclusive and picturesque venues in the state. It was clear no expense was being spared. A small, handwritten note from Chloe was tucked inside. "Sage," it read. "Ethan and I would be so honored if you would come. We're trying to make the venue feel really special and personal. P.S. I absolutely adore that new artist you featured on your gallery's Instagram last month, the one with the incredible cityscapes. Such talent." I stared at the postscript. Chloe followed my gallery on Instagram? She knew my artists? A strange mix of feelings churned within me. The wedding itself loomed as a potentially awkward family obligation. But Chloe's note, it was a small thing, yet it felt significant. I RSVP'd yes, a sense of quiet anticipation and a healthy dose of trepidation beginning to build. I had no idea then, of course, that this wedding, this grand celebration of my brother's perfect life, would become the unlikely stage for a revelation that would shift everything. The irony was already beginning to paint itself. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a flurry of activity for everyone but me, it seemed. My mother called frequently, not to discuss my life of course, but to give breathless updates on flower arrangements, seating charts, and the astronomical cost of Chloe's dress. "It's going to be the event of the season, Sage," she'd gush. "Chloe's parents have invited all sorts of influential people. You should really try to network, dear. Maybe meet someone who could offer you a proper job." I bit back the retort that I already had a proper job. One that I had built from scratch. One that was, slowly but surely, gaining significant recognition in the art world. Montgomery Gallery was now in a much better location, representing several acclaimed artists, and I was even starting to turn a respectable profit. But to my mother, it was still just Sage's little hobby. One afternoon, about a month before the wedding, I received an unexpected call. It was from a high-end event planner, a woman named Isabella Rossi, renowned for orchestrating lavish society weddings. "Miss Montgomery?" Her crisp, professional voice inquired. "Sage Montgomery of Montgomery Gallery?" I confirmed it was me, a little puzzled. "Wonderful," she said. "I'm planning the wedding of Ethan Montgomery and Chloe Davenport. Miss Davenport is a great admirer of your gallery's aesthetic. She specifically requested that we source the artwork for the venue, Willow Creek Estates, through you. She wants pieces that are modern, sophisticated, and vibrant. She mentioned she particularly loves the artists you represent." I was momentarily stunned into silence. Chloe, my future sister-in-law who barely knew me, had specifically requested my gallery? Not just any gallery, but mine? "Ms. Montgomery, are you there?" Isabella Rossi's voice sharpened slightly. Yes, I'm here." I managed, my mind racing. "That's quite a surprise. But yes, I'd be delighted to discuss it. We represent a number of artists whose work would be perfect for such an event." We arranged a meeting. Chloe, it turned out, had impeccable taste. She and Isabella had a clear vision for the ambiance they wanted to create. Elegant, contemporary, with art that would be a talking point, not just background decoration. Over the next few weeks, I worked closely with Isabella, selecting pieces from my most promising artists, bold abstracts, evocative landscapes, stunning photographic works. It was a significant commission, a prestigious showcase for my artists and my gallery. The irony was not lost on me. I was curating the artistic backdrop for my own family's grand event, the family who considered my entire career a waste of time. I decided, for my own subtle reasons, that any mention of Montgomery Gallery in the contracts and communications with Willow Creek Estates would use my full professional name, Sage E. Montgomery, Director, Montgomery Gallery. The E stood for Evangeline, my grandmother's name, the one who had given me those first oil paints. It felt like a small, private tribute. I also ensured that small, discreet plaques would be placed next to each artwork, crediting the artist and, in smaller print beneath, curated by Montgomery Gallery. It was standard practice, but in this context, it felt significant. My parents remained blissfully unaware of my involvement. When my mother asked what I was busy with, I simply said, "Oh, just a big project for the gallery." She nodded vaguely, her attention already drifting to the latest wedding drama. "Well, don't let it distract you too much from finding a nice dress for the wedding, dear. You want to look presentable." As the wedding day approached, a strange sense of calm settled over me. I had overseen the installation of the artwork at Willow Creek Estates myself, working with the venue staff. The pieces looked magnificent, transforming the already beautiful spaces into something truly special. Walking through the empty ballroom, the grand hall, the intimate lounges, all adorned with art I had chosen, art from artists I had nurtured, I felt a quiet sense of pride that was entirely my own. Independent of anyone else's validation, this was my work, this was my world, and soon my family would be walking right into the middle of it, completely oblivious. The stage was set, not just for a wedding, but for a very subtle, very Sage Montgomery-style revelation. I wasn't seeking revenge, not exactly. I was simply allowing the truth of my life, my success, to be present, to be seen, whether they chose to acknowledge it or not. The day of the wedding dawned bright and clear, one of those perfect late spring days. Willow Creek Estates was even more breathtaking in person than in the brochures. Rolling green lawns, ancient oak trees, and a magnificent main house that exuded old-world charm and modern sophistication. As I arrived, valets were already busy, and elegantly dressed guests were making their way towards the garden where the ceremony was to be held. I found my seat, exchanging polite nods with distant relatives who offered vague, "Sage, dear, you look, well," comments. My parents were, of course, in the front row, beaming with pride. My mother looked resplendent in a champagne-colored gown, my father dapper in his tuxedo. Ethan, when he took his place at the altar, looked handsome and nervous, every bit the golden groom. Chloe was radiant as she walked down the aisle, a vision in white. The ceremony was beautiful, heartfelt, and thankfully, relatively brief. Then came the reception. Guests flowed from the garden into the main house, where cocktails and hors d'oeuvres were being served. And there it was, my work. Or rather, the work of my artists, curated by me. The grand entrance hall featured a stunning, large-scale abstract painting by an artist I discovered just a year ago, Amelia Chen. Its vibrant colors and dynamic composition immediately drew the eye. I saw guests pausing, murmuring appreciatively. As I mingled, clutching a glass of champagne, I couldn't help but overhear snippets of conversation. "The art is just incredible, isn't it? So modern, so chic. Chloe has such wonderful taste." I smiled to myself. Yes, Chloe did have wonderful taste. My parents were holding court near the fireplace, surrounded by a group of their friends and some of Chloe's relatives. I watched as my mother gestured vaguely at a series of striking black and white photographs in an adjacent alcove. "Yes, the venue is just lovely," she was saying. "They've really thought of every detail." She hadn't even glanced at the small, discreet plaque beneath the photographs. The ballroom, where dinner and dancing would take place, was the true showcase. Around the perimeter, on specially lit walls, hung a dozen carefully selected pieces, paintings, mixed media, even a small, delicate sculpture on a pedestal. Each piece was accompanied by its little plaque, artist's name, title, medium, and then the line, "Curated by Montgomery Gallery, Sage E. Montgomery, Director." Dinner was served, speeches were made, toasts were offered. My father gave a long, rambling speech about Ethan's many accomplishments, his bright future, how proud they were. He spoke of Ethan's drive, his ambition, his sensible choices. There was no mention of his other child, the one sitting quietly at a table towards the back, the one whose hobby was currently gracing the walls of this very expensive celebration. It was the familiar script, and for once it didn't sting. It was almost amusing. It happened during a lull, after the main course and before the cake cutting. People were milling about, champagne glasses refilled, conversations flowing. I noticed a small crowd had gathered around one of Amelia Chen's larger canvases, a piece titled Convergence. It was a particularly powerful work, and it was drawing a lot of admiration. Among the group were my parents, Ethan and Chloe, along with Chloe's parents, the Davenports, who were known art collectors. Mr. Davenport, a distinguished-looking man with a keen eye, was leaning in to read the plaque. Amelia Chen, he read aloud. Fascinating. I've heard whispers about her. Exceptionally talented. He then squinted at the smaller print. Curated by Montgomery Gallery. Sage E. Montgomery, director. He paused, then looked up, a thoughtful expression on his face. Montgomery Gallery, he mused. That's a very reputable gallery, young, but making quite a name for itself. Specializes in contemporary emerging artists, very cutting edge. He turned to my father. Charles, any relation, Montgomery? My father, who had been basking in the reflected glory of his son's wedding, looked momentarily confused. Montgomery? Oh, well, yes, that's our name, of course. He chuckled, clearly missing the point. Small world, I suppose. My mother, standing beside him, had also leaned in to look at the plaque, her brow furrowed. I saw her lips move as she silently read the name. Sage E. Montgomery. Her eyes widened, just a fraction. She looked up, her gaze sweeping the room, and for a heart-stopping moment, her eyes met mine. I held her gaze, my expression carefully neutral, perhaps a hint of a polite smile playing on my lips. Chloe, bless her heart, chose that moment to speak. Oh yes, she exclaimed, her voice bright and clear, drawing the attention of everyone nearby. The art is all from Sage's gallery. Isn't it wonderful? When Ethan and I were planning, I knew I wanted something truly special, something unique. And Sage's gallery, Montgomery Gallery, it's just fantastic. She has such an incredible eye for talent. She curated everything here for us. She beamed at me across the room. Silence. A different kind of silence this time, not the tense, disapproving silence of my college announcement, but a stunned, disbelieving silence. All eyes in that little group swiveled from the plaque, from Chloe to me. My father's jaw had literally dropped. His face, a moment before ruddy with pleasure and champagne, had gone pale. My mother looked like she'd seen a ghost. Ethan just stared, his mouth agape. Mr. Davenport was the first to recover. A slow smile spread across his face. He looked directly at me, then at my father. Well, Charles, it seems you have a rather brilliant curator in the family. Sage, my dear, he said, his voice carrying easily. This is a truly exceptional selection. You have a remarkable talent. He then turned back to my parents. You must be incredibly proud. The air crackled. My father opened and closed his mouth a few times, like a fish out of water. No sound came out. My mother's hand fluttered to her chest. I saw a ripple of murmurs spread through the nearby guests as the information was processed. Sage? Ethan's sister? Sage? The quiet one? Her gallery? I simply inclined my head slightly towards Mr. Davenport. Thank you, Mr. Davenport. It was a pleasure. The artists I represent are immensely talented. My voice was calm, steady. Inside, however, a strange, exhilarating current was thrumming. It wasn't triumph in the aggressive sense, not a gloating victory. It was something quieter, more profound. It was the simple, undeniable presence of truth. The waste of time had just been declared exceptionally talented and remarkable by one of the city's most respected art collectors, right in front of my stunned family. The paintings on the walls, once silent witnesses, suddenly felt like they were singing. The immediate aftermath of Mr. Davenport's pronouncement and Chloe's cheerful confirmation was a tableau of frozen expressions. My father looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. His jovial, man-of-the-hour demeanor had vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed bewilderment. My mother's face was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, shock, confusion, and was that a flicker of embarrassment? Ethan simply looked dumbfounded, his eyes wide as he stared at me, then at the art, then back at me, as if trying to connect two completely disparate concepts. Mr. Davenport, however, was undeterred by the family drama he had unwittingly ignited. He strode over to me, his hand extended. Sage, a truly remarkable job. I'd love to talk to you about Amelia Chen and a few of the other artists here. Perhaps you could join my wife and me at our table for a moment." His invitation, so casually extended, was a clear signal to everyone within earshot. This wasn't just Ethan's quirky sister, this was a professional, a peer. "I would be delighted, Mr. Davenport," I replied, my voice even. As I walked with him, I could feel the weight of my family's gaze on my back. The murmurs among the other guests had intensified. I heard snippets. "Sage Montgomery? Is that Charles's daughter? Owns a gallery? I had no idea. The art is stunning." Chloe, bless her genuine heart, rushed over to me a few minutes later, her eyes sparkling. "Sage, everyone is raving about the art. It's even more perfect than I imagined." Thank you, thank you." She gave me an enthusiastic hug. Over her shoulder, I saw Ethan approaching, a hesitant, awkward expression on his face. My parents were still rooted to the spot near the fireplace, now engaged in a hushed, intense conversation, their heads close together. They looked utterly flustered. "Sage," Ethan began, stopping a few feet away. I had no idea. Chloe mentioned she liked some gallery, but this is, wow." He gestured vaguely at the room. "This is all you?" "My gallery, yes," I said calmly. "I curated the pieces for you and Chloe." "But Dad always said your art stuff was just, you know." He trailed off, looking profoundly uncomfortable. "A hobby? A waste of time?" I supplied, my tone neutral. "Yes, I remember." He winced. "Look, Sage, this is really impressive, seriously." He seemed genuinely at a loss for words. It was perhaps the first time in his life he had seen me as something other than his younger, slightly lost sister. The rest of the evening unfolded in a surreal haze. Several of Chloe's family friends, many of them influential in the city's cultural and business circles, sought me out. They complimented the collection, asked about specific artists, inquired about Montgomery Gallery. I found myself discussing brushstrokes and artistic intent, market trends and emerging talents, my voice confident, my knowledge clear. I was in my element, and for the first time, my family was witnessing it. My allies, though few, were visibly delighted. Lily, who had come as my +1, was practically vibrating with vicarious triumph. She kept catching my eye and giving me discreet thumbs-ups, her grin wide. Professor Finch hadn't been able to attend, but I knew he would appreciate the irony when I recounted the tale. The most significant shift, however, was with Chloe's parents. Mrs. Davenport, an elegant woman with a warm smile, spent a good 20 minutes talking to me about my journey, the challenges of opening a gallery, my vision for the future. There was genuine respect in her eyes. The Davenports, with their quiet, authoritative approval, had subtly shifted the power dynamic in the room. My parents, who had always sought the approval of people like the Davenports, now found themselves on the outside looking in, their own daughter being lauded for the very thing they had dismissed. Later in the evening, as the dancing was in full swing, my mother approached me. Her usual confident demeanor was gone. She looked uncertain. "Sage," she began, her voice unusually subdued. "The artwork, it really is very beautiful." "Thank you, Mother," I said politely. "Mr. Davenport seems to think very highly of your gallery." She stumbled over the word gallery as if it were foreign. "He has excellent taste," I replied, a small, almost imperceptible smile touching my lips. We didn't realize, Sage," she said, her gaze not quite meeting mine. "We just thought, well, you know." "Yes, Mother, I know what you thought." There was no accusation in my voice, just a statement of fact. My father hovered nearby, looking deeply uncomfortable. He cleared his throat. "Sage," he said gruffly. Good work with the pictures." It was the most awkward compliment I had ever received from him, but it was, in its own way, a monumental admission. There were no grand apologies that night, no dramatic declarations of remorse. It wasn't that kind of movie, but something had irrevocably shifted. The carefully constructed narrative of Sage, the impractical dreamer, had crumbled. In its place stood Sage Montgomery, director of a respected art gallery, a woman of talent and vision, acknowledged by the very people whose opinions my parents valued most. The vindication was quiet, but it resonated deeply. My art, my waste of time, had spoken for itself in the most public and undeniable way possible, right in the heart of their world. And they had finally finally, been forced to see it. The days and weeks following the wedding were interesting. The immediate fallout for my parents and Ethan was a subtle but palpable loss of face. At the post-wedding brunch, hosted by the Davenports, the talk among many guests was still about the stunning artwork. Chloe's mother made a point of loudly praising my curatorial genius directly to my mother, who could only offer a tight, strained smile and murmur something about being very surprised by my hidden talents. The word hidden hung in the air, a silent indictment of their years of willful blindness. Mr. Davenport followed up on his interest, visiting Montgomery Gallery the following week. He purchased 2 major pieces, one by Amelia Chen and another by a young sculptor I represented. He also made several valuable introductions, connecting me with other collectors and art patrons. This professional validation, coming from such a respected figure, was immensely gratifying and incredibly beneficial for my artists and the gallery. My little shop was suddenly on the radar of some very serious players in the art world. My relationship with Chloe blossomed. She started visiting the gallery regularly, not just as a client but as a friend. She was genuinely enthusiastic about the art, eager to learn, and incredibly supportive. "You know, Sage," she confided one afternoon over coffee, "I always thought your parents were a bit unfair about your passion. Ethan never said much, but I could tell he just parroted their views. I hope this opens their eyes." Her straightforwardness was refreshing, and her alliance, unexpected as it was, became a source of genuine warmth. Ethan was a more complicated case. He called me a few days after the wedding, the awkwardness still evident in his voice. "Sage," he began, "I've been thinking about the wedding, the art, everything. I guess I never really understood what you did, or how good you were at it." He paused. "I'm sorry if we made you feel like it wasn't important. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was a start." It was more acknowledgement than I'd received from him in my entire life regarding my career. My parents were the most difficult to gauge. There were no overt apologies, no sudden conversions to art appreciation, but their dismissal, that constant grinding underestimation, ceased. The phone calls from my mother no longer ended with suggestions for real jobs. Instead, there were hesitant questions. "How is the gallery doing, Sage?" Or, "Did Mr. Davenport like those paintings he bought?" It was tentative, cautious, as if they were tiptoeing around a subject they still didn't fully understand, but now knew they couldn't simply ignore. I didn't offer easy absolution. I didn't rush to reassure them or minimize their past behavior. I was polite, civil, but I maintained a certain distance. The power dynamic had undeniably shifted. I no longer needed their approval. In fact, the tables had turned. They were now, in some small way, seeking mine, or at least, seeking to understand the world I inhabited, a world that had suddenly proven to be far more substantial and impressive than they had ever imagined. True support continued to come from my established allies. Lily was ecstatic. "I told you," she crowed, raising a glass of champagne. This time, a good bottle we bought to celebrate. They had to see it to believe it, and even then it took the richest guy in the room pointing it out. Her humor, as always, cut through the lingering complexities of the situation. The most profound change was within me. The wedding hadn't just been a public vindication, it had been a quiet affirmation of my own journey. For years, a part of me, however small, had internalized their dismissal. Had I been a little foolish? Was I chasing an impractical dream? Seeing my work, my curated vision, so widely admired, not by my biased friends, but by discerning strangers and respected collectors, silenced those lingering doubts for good. My worth, my success, was not dependent on my family's validation. It was real, tangible, built by my own hands, my own perseverance, and my own eye for beauty and talent. The waste of time had become the cornerstone of my life, a source of joy, fulfillment, and yes, even worldly success, and that knowledge was more satisfying than any apology. Years have passed since Ethan and Chloe's wedding. Montgomery Gallery has flourished. We've expanded, taken on more artists, and earned a reputation as one of the leading contemporary art galleries in the region. I've curated exhibitions internationally, and my own paintings, yes, I still find time to paint, have found their way into private collections and even a few museums. I'm no longer Sage, the struggling artist, or Sage, Ethan's quirky sister. I am Sage Montgomery, a name respected in my field. I live a life filled with passion, creativity, and the immense satisfaction of doing what I love, on my own terms. My relationship with my family has found a new, if somewhat altered, equilibrium. Chloe remains a dear friend and a staunch supporter, a true sister. Her influence on Ethan has been profound. He's made a genuine effort to understand my world, attending gallery openings and actually looking at the art. Asking intelligent questions, and even, on occasion, expressing pride in my achievements. It's a different relationship than the one we had growing up, more mature, more respectful. He's no longer just the golden boy, he's a man who has learned to see beyond his own reflection. My parents, well, that's more nuanced. They are proud, in their way. They boast to their friends about their daughter, the successful gallery owner, the one who knows all the important artists. It's a pride born more of my external success than any deep understanding or appreciation of art itself, but it's a far cry from the dismissive sighs of my youth. The waste of time has become a source of vicarious prestige for them. We have a cordial relationship. The old hurts haven't vanished entirely, some wounds leave permanent scars, but the constant sting of their disapproval is gone. I visit for holidays, we have pleasant, if sometimes superficial, conversations. I no longer seek their validation, and ironically, now that I don't need it, they offer it more freely. They still don't quite get what I do, not really, but they respect that I've made a success of it. Perhaps that's as much as one can ask for in some cases. Looking back, the journey was incredibly difficult. There were so many times I wanted to give up, so many moments when their indifference felt like a crushing weight. But that night at the wedding, seeing the shock and dawning realization on their faces, it wasn't about rubbing their noses in my success. It was about the quiet, undeniable affirmation of my path. It was about the art itself speaking louder than years of dismissal. The most important lesson I learned, the wisdom I carry with me every day, is that your value is inherent. It is not bestowed by others, not even by your family. It is something you cultivate within yourself, through your passion, your dedication, your resilience. Chasing external validation is a futile exercise. True fulfillment comes from honoring your own voice, your own truth, even when no one else seems to hear it. Sometimes being underestimated can be your greatest advantage. It allows you to build your empire in peace, brick by brick, until one day, the world, and perhaps even your detractors, can't help but notice the magnificent structure you've created. True family, I've learned, isn't always about blood, it's about who sees you, who believes in you, and who champions your spirit. And sometimes the most powerful statements are made not with words, but with the quiet, irrefutable evidence of a life well lived, a passion pursued, and a dream realized against all odds. So, what about you? Have you ever had a moment where your truth was undeniably revealed, perhaps in an unexpected way? Share your stories and experiences in the comments below. I'd love to read them. And if this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt that struggle for recognition or had to carve out your own path, please don't forget to hit that like button. Subscribe for more stories about overcoming, about finding your worth, and about the surprising ways life can bring about justice. And always remember this: believe in yourself, even when it's hard, because your passion has power and your voice deserves to be heard. You are far more capable than you, or anyone else, might think.